Hello, and welcome back to Winter's Tales here on Arran Sound, where we're continuing with episode 4 of our epic and frankly rather spooky fairy tale for grown-ups, Dance Beneath a Scarlet Moon. Over the course of the previous 3 episodes, we've seen the honeymoon on Arran in the year 1919 of Heather Hallgarth and her war veteran husband James, disrupted by the appearance in their midst of the mysterious, seductive Shona. After Heather has seen disturbing evidence of how close her new husband and Shona have grown, the honeymoon couple are abruptly estranged, leaving James vulnerable to the call of Shona as she leads him out into the snowy night beneath a scarlet moon. And now, folks, with a caution that this episode contains scenes not perhaps for those of a nervous disposition, we present episode 4 of Dance Beneath a Scarlet Moon. In the rawest depths of her weeping, huddled there on the bed, Heather found herself haunted by a love story. It was all still so clear in her memory, sharp at least as her memory of that day's betrayal. She recalled her first ever sight of James, a whole year before. A handsome scarecrow, as he then seemed, laid out in that hospital bed set so incongruously against the finery of a South Glaswegian country house. He had hardly seemed to notice her, had hardly seemed to notice anything, sunk so deep in his own woundings, as were so many of the young men sent home from a faraway conflict Heather could barely bring herself to imagine. And then she remembered another day, shortly after James had received his final wearying bout of surgery. She had supposed him sleeping, and after checking he had all he needed at his bedside, she wandered away a few steps to look at a painting overlooking his bed. El Greco, they said it was, lady in a fur wrap, some bygone beauty in a hood of white ermine, her own black curls peeping out, her dark eyes and thin pink lips fixed on her own onlooker. Beautiful, muttered James at her back. She looked round in surprise. Yes, she said. Yes, the El Greco, yes, yes it is. No, he said. No, I meant you. She recalled taking him for his first limping walk around the spacious park surrounding Pollock House. Spring, the first spring in 5 years without a war elsewhere, shimmering, vibrant, through every leaf and every tree, every blade of grass and every tiny flower sprouting between, birds singing, and the nearby herd of Highland cattle lowing in sweet concert. She felt him clutch her hand more tightly as he told her how out of reach and paradisal a Glasgow park, the very thought of a Glasgow park, had seemed amid the endless grey murk of the battlefield, and how soft and strong that slender hand of hers felt after the hard violence and fluid swamping horror of the noble cause he'd fought. She squeezed his hand back told him a walk in the park might be a noble enough victory for the two of them that particular afternoon. They could, if he liked, walk further the next day. Walk? It seemed no time at all. They were dancing. Dancing in the great Albert Ballroom on Bath Street. She at first helping him limp through the waltzes. Those their evenings there went on, and the life and youth in him regained fuller purchase in what had so recently been taken for a dead shell. He began to be able to meet her, to match her, to meld with her in every movement of the ongoing dance. Afterward, walking her down to the river before hailing a cab to see her safely home to Pollock House, he one night thanked her for how light he suddenly felt on his feet, smooth of movement as the water below. "This is a little more than I normally do for a patient," she replied. And he told her he didn't want her for a nurse, he wanted her for a wife. And the pale moon shone on the waters. And in that lonely bedroom, in her honeymoon home on the faraway island of Arran, Heather opened her teary eyes, as shaken by recollection of how much she had loved, how much she did love him, as she had been by sight of him that day, fumbling in the bushes with that other woman. And as she wiped the tears aside, she saw amid the leafy swirls of the wallpaper above the fireplace's ruddy flickerings a forest, a deep forest, where snow fell red as gobs of blood, and roses redder still grew, thus watered from the forest floor. Roses with thorns dense as barbed wire. And through that lush and spiky carpet stepped James. He seemed quite naked but for his battle scars, as he stepped forward through the meshed roses. She could see his legs already soaked red, his upper body spattered evermore by upward sprays and spurts of his own blood, his healed wounds beginning to weep anew in a scarlet sympathy. She saw at every step his face flinch, contort with the pain of onward movement. She found herself reaching out to him, though he was unimaginably far away, and she could see that another hand held his already, the hand of another figure close on his right side, drifting forward in smooth tandem with his own faltering movements. What figure was it? No figure at all, not as such. Rather, it was as if the red snow and the roses had swirled their tints up with the dark browns and greys of the tree trunks, the dark greens of the pine boughs rippling above, most of all with the utter blackness of the gaps between the trees, to form a tall, amorphous figure, wild as a wolf on its hind legs, wakeless and focused as a swooping bird of prey. James faltered, fell amid the thorns that would rip him apart utterly, and that other presence dived hard upon him, spreading great wings, and the wings were the wings of a raven. "No!" cried Heather. "No!" The vision gone, she leapt from the bed, dragged on her coat, hurried out into the night. She saw the scarlet colour of the moon, the way it seemed to stain the whole landscape, from hilltop to the spread of the sea below, to the tiniest snowflake drifting down before her. But then, spotting James's footprints in the thin layer of snow that had already formed in the garden, following them to the gate where another set of footprints, seemingly of slender and naked feet, joined them, she knew she had no choice but to hurry on. On Shona led him, through a landscape whose familiarity had become utterly strange. The forest through which they walked, possibly one of the woodlands between the house and Glen Ashdale. Yet it looked more like some great ruined ballroom, tree trunks for pillars, its mossy floor like some tattered and rumpled carpet of green velvet. The moonlight now fell about them in thin crimson ribbons, filtered through the dense boughs above. Snowflakes like splintered rubies slipping through those same gaps to silently spot the ground at their feet. He thought to ask her where she was taking him, but every time he looked to her, every time she smiled back, words seemed worthless, less substantial than the tiniest flake of snow garlanding her dark hair. So he let her steer him on, through further forest depths, where he glimpsed other shapes flitting through those dark gaps between the trees, shapes like loping beasts, all spiked fur and fangs and antlers. Was that a snake? A great snake, blue-scaled, sliding and slithering between the tree trunks, as wide and lengthy as they were. A raven darted, flapped among the branches and snowy air in front of them, a ball of black fire. The music was denser than ever in the air about them, wild and violent and warm and enticing as the moon's red light. Shona's onward steps, those bare feet seemingly immune to the chill of the snow-dusted forest floor, became little skips that swiftly shifted into the steps of a circling dance, a dance into which she led him, now with both her hands latched onto both of his. He entered that dance, all thought of doing anything else, being anywhere else, melting away at the far back of his mind. He clutched her closer. They spun around, the forest making its own dizzy spin about them, its stark shapes seeming to melt even as he and Shona moulded their dancing forms more tightly about one another. Was it a forest any more? At the corner of his eye it seemed to have become some great ruined cathedral, with broken-topped vaults for bats to roost in, and spilled wine or blood puddled on the floor. Or no. It was more like one of those battle-ravaged corners of the continent which he knew so horribly well. Bodies heaped and smouldering and all knotted up in rust-red barbed wire at the foot of trees blasted to branchless pinnacles and broken scraps of wall from some farmhouse that had got in the shelling's way. He thought he saw some of his fallen comrades standing there in the shadows, faces like ash. Except no, it was no such place. Wasn't the forest rather like some single almighty red rose blossoming all around them, its petals soft enough for sleeping upon? The dance had dizzied him too far. He lost his footing, fell to the snowy ground, carrying her with him. They landed in a tighter embrace yet, attacking one another with kisses. He ran a hand down her leg. dragged up a length of the green dress she wore. He saw that in falling she had cut the skin at one side of her calf on some spike or other of the undergrowth. He reached down to lend a tender caress to the bloodless and slit-like cut, but as he touched it, the skin at either side of the narrow opening was pushed back a little, exposing dark red fur like the pelt of a deer sprouting within. Her hand grabbed his by the wrist, drawing it away. Then she was dragging him back up onto his feet, and on, swiftly on, to where an earth-shuddering rumble began to make itself heard. Stumbling on through trees and undergrowth and snow falling more and more thickly, Heather again caught sight of those two figures flitting distantly through the landscape below her. Figures that might have been easy to mistake for commonplace lovers hurrying to their tryst, a sight the wife of one of them might have run from rather than towards. But no, the air itself seemed to crackle, to shimmer with something more dangerous than any commonplace romantic transgression. And so she hurried on in the same direction as those figures. The plummeting white water of the Glen Ashdale Falls beginning to cut through the darkness not far ahead of them. It was blinding almost, the brightness of the frothing waters fall through the dark landscape and the bright moonlight. Shona led him to a rocky edge overlooking the drop of the uppermost of the falls. And the swirling rocky pool it formed ahead of the torrents slide over into the lower and still steeper waterfall below. Down there, she told him. Down there, where the wilderness draws its breath. The fall from height to depth stops a moment to shape a rocky rest. There's the place for love's rage to make rough peace. For lovers like us to twine our violence and be at ease. And he let her begin, leading him down the rough and thorny side of the all but vertical slope that would carry them to the rocky pool. He hardly cared in that moment if they slipped and broke their necks. It felt the kind of moment where the most terrible thing that might happen would be the most perfect. Above, far above, Heather had lost sight of the two figures for a long moment, but now glimpsed them once more against the moon's reflection, and yes, that stony pool, shaping a middle step between the upper and lower waterfall. Hastening to a rocky outcrop from which she could more directly overlook the water, she saw them shed their clothes and wade hand in hand into water which the scarlet moon hued like the richest, reddest wine, their skins silver pale against it. She saw her husband led towards the burning white curtain of the upper waterfalls tumble into the pool, and she called to James with all her might, though she knew he would never hear her past the water's thunder. The water roared and splintered into white spray as it hit the rear edge of the pool, wafting a draught across them, ice cold as that water which now lapped about their bare knees. But still Shona drew him on against the current, and still he went, for her beauty was brighter still in his eye than that mighty tumbling wall of moonlit water. A step or two short of immersing themselves in that chilly flow, that cascade, she stopped and faced him directly. "Cold, are ye, my warm-blooded swain?" she said. Not cold as I've been in my mountain chasm, longing, oh yes, longing for the red life in the likes of you. Us, of the fairy kind of fairy that's my kind. We'd die of thirst in this modern world if we didn't get out and fight for what we need. You, my blood-medalled warrior, you're the breed of man I knew so well in ancient warring days, and see so little of late. And I'm to let you go? And what? Shrink in myself to the chill of stone? No! I know the heat of blood being what I am, and what I am knows the feast that's there, and the fineness of the first bite. And she surged forward in his embrace, bit into his breast, and clean through his red heart. His blood, when it escaped her teeth and lips, leapt into the water's fall, staining its bone white, briefly scarlet. James arched back in her grip, his head sagging until he was looking directly up at the scarlet moon. And dying, he recalled when he had last seen a moon red as that, and in doing so remembered at last something he had never dared recall until then, and this was that, as he had lain on that far-away battlefield, eyes full of blood, innards opened wide, he had wanted then and there to die, to slip off into the dark. For it was life he had realised at that faraway moment, as perhaps the fully alive never can realise, which holds the true monopoly on deathly horror, on a hell hard enough to seem without end, the barbs on its wire, the bullets in its air so countless. Death, on the other hand, deep and soft and blind as black water, death had felt then and there like... But he had lived after all, and the living can't think of such things, not if they are to live at all. He knew now, as she drew more blood, swifter and swifter out of him, that he was dead indeed, as good as, that his terrible, faraway, fallen warrior's wish was being answered. And knew too, with a chilly spasm, that he didn't want this any more. That somewhere out there in the dark there was Heather, who had come like light and warmth into his broken life's icy winter. Heather, who had made the impulses of a dying brain seem the coarsest derangement. Heather, who had shown him a life where before he could picture only endless hell, as full of sweet, simple possibility as any fool's dream of paradise. It was Heather he wanted, not this. He tried to call to her, but the pulse, which might have shaped that breath, was freshly drained from his heart, and so he fell away from Shona's embrace with a single shallow breath. In the instant before he hit the icy water, it was rather her voice, Heather's, that he heard calling for him. That was the last thing he heard. "James!" Heather called from the rough ground above, even as she saw him splash backward at full length into the dark water, the water's flow catching him, washing him swift towards the brink of the second and steeper waterfall. "James!" she called louder, but neither he nor the water heard. and the next thing she saw was his white body dropping over the edge of the steep plunge of white water, falling so swift in and out of the spray and froth. "James!" She hurled herself forward, lost her own footing on the steep flank of turf and rock overlooking the waterfall's near side. She was suddenly falling herself, swift as James below, only over rough mud and jolting stone, over jagged heather and coarse ferns rather than through water. Even so, she could see ahead a brink over which her slide would cast her into unimpeded thin air. Nothing but it between her and the rocks and fallen trees at the foot of the falls, amid which she knew James must already have landed. She groped about for something to grasp, something to hold her back from the drop. A single bedraggled birch tree overlooked the plunge. She reached for it, the force of her panic allowing her to fix both hands about it, even as her feet slid into nothingness, hurling clods of dirt into the air. But she clung on. Her slide, her fall, halted. She dragged herself up closer against the slender trunk, looking down to spot James's pale form tangled up in the rocks and branches at the foaming foot of the waterfall. Somewhere in her mind she supposed him more than likely dead, but she had to reach him anyway, and fast. Looking to one side she saw, yes, a way down that, though it still looked terrifyingly steep, offered something slightly more manageable than a pure vertical plunge. She struggled her way towards it, then struggled her way down. It was a challenge still, involving as many stomach-jolting slides as slippery clamberings and fumblings for support. However many agonisingly long minutes it took her was hard to tell amid her panic, but eventually it saw her slip down towards the edge of the pool at the waterfall's foot, spray wafting about her, soaking her still more thoroughly than the snowfall and mud on her descent. Just ahead she could see James, naked and white, caught up amid the black branches of a fallen tree straddling the onward flow from the waterfall's foot. He moved slightly this way and that, and hope surged in her that, however broken, he might have survived the drop. She plunged into the pool without further thought, fighting its icy bite and churning current, driven on by thought of rescuing him, of nursing him back to health as heaven knew she had nursed him back before. "James!" she cried, struggling for breath, chilled to the bone, grasping at the branches of the fallen tree to drag herself along. James! James, it's me! Heather, are you?" But now she saw the blind stare his eyes had for the moon above, and realised that the movement in his limbs simply came of the current shifting his defenceless bones back and forth, against the tree trunk. She fought her way towards him harder than ever, snapping and tearing aside branches that got in the way, wrapping her arms around his ribs and dragging him close. "James!" But he felt colder against her than the water, his body flopping against and away from her like some uprooted clump of bedraggled weeds. She cradled his head, looked him in the face, his hopelessly handsome face, then pushed his head against her shoulder and cried out, trying and failing to make her pain, her outrage heard over the din of the waterfall. But something, perhaps, heard her. High above, a shrill cry sounded. itself loud enough to cut like a blade through the water's roar. She looked up, steeply up, to see a figure, white and naked, black hair billowing about its head, standing at the upper edge of this lower waterfall, impervious to the current's power to wash it over. No, this figure preferred to leap, not drop, into the thin air, to cast itself at full length across the sky. Momentarily silhouetted against the scarlet moon, and as she saw it there, it seemed to lengthen, to swell, to change its shape from that of a woman to that of... But it dropped from the sky too fast for her to be fully sure. It had landed on the narrow bank nearby, the bank from which she herself had descended into the water, before she saw for certain that what now confronted her was some immense dog or no, wolf. Yes, a wolf, almost bear-sized in its fang-bearing ferocity. Its hair a dark, spiky red. The thing snarled at her a second, froth dripping from its jowls, and then it came leaping, splashing into the water, raging towards her. In her panic, Heather found herself releasing James's body, grabbing at and scrambling over the slippery, wet trunk of the fallen tree, even as the beast came snapping at her, catching the hem of her skirt in its teeth and tearing at the fabric. As much through the dampness of the wood as through her own effort, Heather slid and splashed down off the far side of the trunk, momentarily placing its bulk between her and the creature that came lunging after her. She turned, splashed her way up onto the other bank, reaching it just as she heard the great wolf come splashing the same way. She started a run along the narrow bank, the steep rise of the ground on the side of her away from the water, giving her little room for manoeuvre. The snow-flaked, spray-dampened ground was slippery beneath her. She stumbled again, the beast lurching close behind, its breath against the back of her neck, startlingly hot amid the chill of the night. She knew it would catch up any second, looked around in her hopelessness for some route of escape that simply was not there, and then saw how swiftly the water, plunging onward through a set of rapids, was flowing beneath her. Even as she felt a killing bite, take shape in the air close behind, she threw herself from the bank, splashing back into the icy water, and letting that swiftling current sweep her down the glen. The water, however fast it ran, was not deep, and she was buffeted over one submerged rock after another, all sight of her pursuer lost, as leaping foam and the bushes and trees of the bank and the snowy clouds high above all swirled about her. She was jolted against the bank at a point where rough strands of bush overhung the water. She grabbed at these, arresting her onward drift, even at the cost of lacerating her hands. She began dragging herself and the weight of her saturated clothing from the torrent, collapsing, gasping upon the mud and stone of the bank. But she had barely fixed breath back in her watery lungs before a familiar wheezing growl made itself heard, not far away, accompanied by a warm stink of animal breath. She started up to a sitting position, saw the great beast standing a few feet away, as if it had been waiting patiently for her to notice how easily it had caught up with her. Something like a harsh smile in the way it clawed its shaggy lips back across its fangs. She raised herself to her feet as the wolf made a first flex of its muscles, ahead of a forward leap. She considered the possibility she might be set to die as abruptly as her husband. She decided her preferences lay elsewhere. The creature leapt. She lunged for the great broken branch she had spotted on the ground to one side of her. Grabbing it with both hands, she swung it upward just as the fangy maw filled the space to one side of her skull. The branch smacked hard into those broad jaws, knocking the wolf sideways. It hit the dirt, scrambled swiftly upright, snarling its anger at being so defied, a little of its own blood frothing around its mouth. It leapt again hither, swung with the branch, but this time the beast caught the branch between its teeth and swerved past her, knocking her sidelong. It landed a short distance away and turned to let her see it shred the branch to tatters between its fangs and claws. She backed away as it moved on her again, this time with a slower, more patient tread. She could sense the edge of the bank close at her back, the beast cornering her there. She looked around for some fresh option. None presented itself. The creature crept closer, something like a rough laughter, in the way hot wisps of breath, vapour, escaped its jaws. It was nothing more considered than an outrage at its animal relish of the moment that saw her grab the biggest rock one of her bleeding hands could hold, hurling it between the beast's eyes. The rock bounced off without effecting any significant injury, but the impudence of the assault switched the creature's pleasure into fury, bringing it leaping forward with a ferocious carelessness that saw its snout knock Heather backward off the bank before its bite could find purchase. Once again she hit the chilling water. Once again its current swept her roughly away, bumped her over stones, tore her past scraps of fallen tree, swilled mouth and nostrils with silty water, whirled the world about her so swiftly she lost sight of the beast she supposed might be pursuing her. But the water's swift if shallowing flow next threw her against the point where part of the bank had fallen away immediately beneath a tree which stood there, creating an overhang of exposed tree roots and fragile turf above the water. Swept into that half-submerged alcove, she grabbed at the lowermost of the tree roots, holding herself there, head bowed below that low umbrella of roots and dirt, the water about her chest as she sat upright, gasping back a few breaths. She had barely accomplished this before, above and behind her, she heard the gruff breathings of the wolf, the sharp cracklings of undergrowth beneath its heavy, cautiously advancing tread. She huddled tight as she could into the earthy, watery dark under the overhang and waited for it to draw nearer. She could faintly make out the sound of it sniffing the air, and knew it might be a matter of seconds before it regained her scent. And then an idea came to her, a poor scrap of an idea, but it was all the idea that presented itself. She dragged off the little jacket she wore and the soaked blouse beneath, making sure to wipe as much blood from her lacerated hands across the fabric as she could. She knotted the garments around one another in a deliberately untidy fashion and then cast them into the water's flow, it swept them swiftly downriver, almost too swiftly, for they rapidly seemed all but lost to sight, and the wolf still audibly some distance off. But then there was a sudden swiftening of those weighty pawings upon the earth, and she heard and felt the beast's weight hastening directly onto the upper side of the overhang beneath which she sheltered. A fine rain of sandstone dust falling about her. The breathings of the beast were immediately above her. She awaited its attack, knowing she had no resource left to meet it with. The beast sniffed more sharply. And then suddenly leapt from the overhang, leapt directly above her, splashing down into the middle of the water. She waited for it to turn her way. It did not, splashing on downstream and towards the other bank, to a spot where Heather now discerned her knotted jacket and blouse had become snagged on some half-submerged branch, looking a fair semblance of a drowning body. Claws and fangs tore clothing and branch apart, scraps of them flying high in the air amid a rain of spray. Heather, seeing so clearly what the creature had in mind for her, grabbed the edge of the overhang, dragged herself up onto the bank, and now, dressed only in chemise, skirt and boots all saturated, she began running away from the water through a stretch of more level ground to suggest her being towards the bottom end of the glen. The ground there was boggy, half flooded, her every step splashing through as much water as mud. At her back she heard an angry howl as the wolf paused to realise how it had been fooled. This swiftly followed by weighty splashings as it raged back her way. She was running on through a clump of dense trees, weaving this way and that to lay the most challenging trail she could. But already she could hear the wolf raging and roaring into the woodland after her. Yet ahead she discerned a couple of points of warm light and turned her sprint towards them. As she hurried past the next clump of trees, she saw it was a small cottage. Candles glowing behind a couple of its leaded windows. Running on that way, she called out for help! Help! Help me! But even as she called, a bellowing roar filled the air at her back, and the swipe of a mighty claw cut across her spine, throwing her forward to land on hands and knees by the cottage's closed door. Dragging herself up, she hammered a fist upon the door. Help me! Help me! She swung about. The great wolf raged towards her, fangs bared, its foul and bloody breath hitting her hard in the face. She shut her eyes tight, waiting for its killing bite. And there, I'm afraid, folks, we leave this week's episode of Dance Beneath a Scarlet Moon. If you're like me, you might, frankly, need to get your breath back. Need time to settle your shattered nerves. But if it's any comfort to you, this is not the end of our story. This is not one of those rather cruel terror tales where the story ends with the monster crunching the protagonist's bones. Oh, no. There's more to come here on Arran Sound. And I hope you'll join me again. Same time, same place, Winter's Tales, for episode 5 of Dance Beneath a Scarlet Moon. In the meantime, I wish you pleasant dreams.